Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman has the night off. On the show tonight,
we're sort of responsible for each other's well-being.
Amanda Vinicky reports live from Rogers Park on Chicago's North Side as part of our In Your Neighborhood series.
It's better to have a Zoom Thanksgiving than an ICU Christmas.
With holiday travel numbers reaching into the tens of millions, we check in with Chicago's top doc on how to safely celebrate this Thanksgiving.
This was a really difficult, hard budget.
Chicago's budget passes by a record-breaking thin margin of yes votes. What went down behind the scenes? How Chicago area businesses are preparing for the winter months and what they hope to see on the horizon. The role of advocacy journalism in telling the stories of marginalized communities. And revisiting a show of paintings by the French Impressionist Claude Monet and the Chicago garden that they inspired.
In Paris, as you mentioned, I'm in Rogers Park tonight as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. We'll be speaking with leaders from local food pantries who are working to feed their neighbors this Thanksgiving. Also, some local business owners who are struggling to stay afloat during the pandemic. But for now, back to you.
Thanks, Amanda. And first tonight, some of today's top stories. Mayor Lori Lightfoot says she's, quote, extremely concerned that Thanksgiving could become a coronavirus super spreader event. Lightfoot is again calling on Chicagoans to avoid travel and large family gatherings over the holiday and stressed that the city is on track to lose an additional 1,000 Chicagoans to the virus by the start of the new year. But the mayor did have some good news to share regarding the availability of a vaccine.
We are expecting to have the first supply of COVID-19 vaccine before the end of this year. Per CDC and federal guidance, only a limited segment of the population will receive the vaccine first. This includes our frontline, high-risk healthcare workers and first responders, those people who are treating COVID patients themselves. Then that will be followed by especially high-risk individuals.
Lightfoot says vaccines are not to be expected widely available for the general population until mid to late 2021. And I'll talk with Chicago Public Health Commissioner Dr. Allison Arwady a bit later in the program. Meanwhile, state health officials report more than 11,000 new cases and an additional 155 people have died. The total number of COVID-19 cases confirmed in the state is now over 685,000, while 11,832 Illinoisans have lost their lives to the virus. The statewide test positivity rate currently stands at 12.2%. And the unemployment rate is up as well, and available jobs are down over the past year in all 14 metropolitan areas of Illinois. That's according to data released today by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Illinois Department of Employment Security. The number of non-farm jobs decreased in all 14 Illinois metropolitan areas. The not seasonally adjusted unemployment rate in Illinois was 6.5% in October, 3 points higher than October 2019. Soccer fans in Chicago and around the world are mourning the death of legend Diego Maradona, who captained Argentina to World Cup glory in 1986. Maradona died today at the age of 60 from cardiac arrest. The Argentine Football Association confirmed that news, tweeting that it expresses its deepest sorrow for the death of our legend, Diego Armando Maradona, and you'll always be in our hearts. Maradona, who last month had surgery for a blood clot on the brain, was widely regarded as one of the greatest players in the history of the game and was revered across the sporting world. Argentina's President Alberto Fernandez has announced 3 days of national mourning there. Holiday lights are starting to go up in Rogers Park, Chicago's northernmost neighborhood. The neighborhood hugs the coast of Lake Michigan and spreads out to a college campus, businesses, and large historic homes. And it's where our Amanda Vinicky and producer Quinn Myers spent this rainy day for this week's edition of Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood. We go now to Amanda, who's near the Red Line stop at Morse Avenue in one of Rogers Park's commercial corridors. Amanda.
Yeah, Paris, Rogers Park is a neighborhood where seniors live in assisted living buildings across Sheridan Road from college students who attend Loyola. The neighborhood, about a quarter of the residents are black, a quarter are Hispanic or Latino. There's also a large Orthodox Jewish population. 2 zip codes make up Rogers Park, and together they've seen about 5,000 confirmed COVID-19 cases. That's relatively high compared to case counts in Edgewater on the neighborhood's southern end and Evanston to the north. But it is far lower than the 10,000 COVID-19 cases that so far have been reported in the 60629 zip code on the southwest side. That includes West Lawn and Marquette Park. The pandemic has heightened food insecurity throughout Chicago, including in Rogers Park. Every Wednesday, the Howard Area Community Center gives away food to those who need it. Employees say they used to distribute food to a couple hundred families a month. Now that has doubled. They also deliver food to homebound seniors. Food pantry supervisor Silvina Mamani started volunteering there 23 years ago. The community center has been a fixture in Rogers Park for more than 50 years. The building it's in used to be a church with services for immigrants.
It's the most, I think, diverse community and neighborhood. So that's why it's changing. Every time it's changing. Sometimes we have more Latinos coming. Now we have more people from the Middle East, from Africa, from Asia.
Now the association does so much more, and it has kept up with all of it throughout COVID. Dental clinics, ESL classes, citizenship workshops, resume and other assistance for those seeking jobs, HIV prevention, and support for those who are domestically abused. Unfortunately, demand for those services in particular has also heightened during the pandemic.
They are leaving the building with a hope, kind of hope, and we are here. With this time of pandemic, we are here, we are open. We are through virtual classes, through just distributing food, we are open, and we are here for them.
We will have more from another local food provider later in the program. But meanwhile, the Rogers Park Business Alliance says it is doing whatever it can to help businesses, making them aware of webinars, of new city and state COVID-19 rules, and opportunities for grants.
Specifically now, everyone needs money. And so we've been following all of the grants that are available, and making sure that we reach out to, if it's industry specific, to that industry so they know what's available to them, and encouraging them and helping with the applications if we get to that.
We saw some of that collaboration on display when we went to Third Coast Comics along Sheridan Road. Owner Terry Gant has encouraged customers to wear masks with a sign reminding them Spider-Man has been wearing a mask since he was in high school. Now, Wednesdays are a big day for comics fans in comic shops nationwide. It's when new releases are dropped.
These are business owners that are not competitive. They're collaborative. They help each other. They want to work together. We have restaurants over in Jarvis Square and restaurants over here on Glenwood that work together to do events and crawls and that kind of stuff. And we're still doing, our theaters, would do things with the restaurants and stuff.
And actually that obviously was not Gant. Jumped the gun a bit. So let's go now and hear from Terry Gant, the comic book owner who I talked about, collaborative.
We have when it's not raining, we have a sidewalk sign up that says, "Hey, introverts of the world, you've been training for this your entire lives, right? Come get these books." I treat it like I'm a small shop. I can be agile. You're a human being. You can adjust, right? So why don't we just bring your ability to adjust and my agility together, and then get you the books that you need. You'll be happy, and I'll be happy.
So getting back to that, even so, Gant says that due to COVID as well as due to a lack of Loyola students on campus, his business has seen a major drop in foot traffic. Despite that, he has gone back, in fact, actually to the model of how his business started, and that's mail-in orders.
We work out what it is you're kind of into, and I ship anything you want that way. I even have what's really been working is my chef's choice plan, which is you give me a budget and tell me the kind of things that you tend to like, and then I pick from the shelves kind of what I think you would like based on your taste, and we just ship it to you anywhere in the U.S.
And so he, as I said, rather than trying to draw businesses to his shop, actually, even for Black Friday, or as the city of Chicago is encouraging shoppers this year to shop black, as in black-owned businesses, Gant says for shopper safety as well as for his own, he hopes that more comic fans will shop remotely. And now here is where the spirit of collaboration kicks in. When I called Gant to see whether he'd be willing to talk with us for an interview, he suggested that we also speak with the shop owner just across the hall, Sarah Lukens, who owns Chi-Town Magpie. Lukin suspects her store may be the smallest shop in Chicago. It's 100 square feet only, but it is stocked with posters, ornaments, candles, other trinkets and treasures, all either made in or celebrating Rogers Park in the city of Chicago. She's also missing Loyola students who would typically be coming in for a $10 Chicago print that they could hang in their apartment or their dorm wall. Now she's looking for her neighbors to step in and step up.
Really going to have to step up now and really think micro local. If you want your street scene and your neighborhood to stay the way you have enjoyed it being, and the reason you bought real estate maybe in your neighborhood, you're going to have to support the small businesses because it's really the flavor of your community.
And that is something to keep in mind as you begin to shop for this holiday season. We will be back soon with Cook County Commissioner Larry Suffredin. He's represented the area for nearly 20 years. But for now, Paris, back to you.
Thanks, Amanda. City officials' pleas for folks to stay home for Thanksgiving seem to be falling on deaf ears, as AAA estimates some 50 million Americans will still be traveling this week. The city announced last week that it'll be opening a permanent testing facility at Midway Airport, and that $14 million in federal grant funds will be going to community health centers. This comes as demand for testing has grown exponentially in recent weeks. Will the city and testing facilities be prepared if another surge of cases comes after the holiday? And joining us once again is Dr. Allison Arwady, Commissioner of the Chicago Department of Public Health. Dr. Arwady, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Well, let's hear what your boss, Mayor Lightfoot, had to say about Thanksgiving celebrations and plans and travel a little earlier today.
I'm urging you not to engage in your normal Thanksgiving plans, to keep it limited to your immediate household. While we have seen encouraging signs in our COVID-19 positivity rate, levels are still in the double digits and dangerously high. And we are still on track, unfortunately, tragically, for an additional 1,000 deaths by the new year just in Chicago alone.
Dr. Arwady, what's your reaction to the number of people traveling and the lines we see at O'Hare despite pleas to stay home, stay socially distant?
Yes, I mean, I can control what I can control. And what I really have asked is that, folks here in Chicago avoid travel, and if they haven't already left and moved, to really not bring folks into their household. I think, unfortunately, we still are seeing a lot of people who are not taking COVID as seriously as they need to, given how it's surging across the U.S. We're adding more than 1 million cases a week here across the country. So I'm worried that we definitely could see another increase in cases after Thanksgiving, just like they saw in Canada after Canadian Thanksgiving.
Are there any models that show you what exactly those numbers would be? We've seen the positivity rate come down just a little bit. What could the caseload and the positivity rate be in a worst case scenario?
Right. So as you know, we have seen just the beginnings of some curve flattening. My worry is more that we could get right back onto that trajectory that we've been on. And that would really be tragic, because that has the potential to fill our hospitals and lead to even more deaths.
What is a safe way to celebrate Thanksgiving, if you're with your household or with a few people?
Right. So we very much encouraged people for Thanksgiving, but just right now under our stay-at-home advisory, to not have people into your household who don't already live there. If there are people who are going to be gathering, please remember that a negative test does not mean someone might not have COVID. Tests can be negative for a number of days, even while someone can be infectious. So if there is going to be gathering, do the masking, do the distancing, but it's not too late to change your plans. And if you can not have people over right now, we recommend it. We estimate as many as 1 in 17 Chicagoans right now has active COVID.
All right, as this is going on, I want to show two maps here of testing. First, the positivity rates. On the left there, that's what you're seeing. So the positivity rates are really high on the southwest side, the darker blue. And then the right map, that's the test rates. And so the test rates are kind of lower where those light blue and gray areas are. So Dr. Arwady, how do you get more testing accessibility to areas like the southwest side that are seeing these high positivity rates?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is exactly what the Chicago Department of Public Health has been working on. We know there are a lot of different entities that do testing across Chicago, academic hospitals, clinical settings, private practices. The CDPH has worked to push testing every single week to where it is most needed, those areas of high positivity where we're seeing cases. And so we've been standing up some permanent sites as well as mobile sites in those areas, but we represent a relatively small fraction. The good news is here in Chicago, we've more than doubled the number of tests that are being done every day just since the beginning of October. So that's been important, and we're seeing that continue to grow because we're supporting a lot of the partners even as we're putting additional funding into testing at the city level.
And part of that includes a new testing site at Midway. How much capacity will that have?
Yes, so I want to emphasize it's at Midway, but it's in a parking lot at Midway because it is not really aimed at travelers. It is aimed at people who live in that 60629 zip code, which is where we've seen a lot of surge in cases. So similar to our other static locations, that will have the ability to bring through, many hundreds, potentially as many as 1,000 per day. And we're working to sort of, continue to build that capacity. And it's good because already on our first day opening, we saw, more than, I think, 650 people tested, even on that very first day. We're asking people who have other options to get tested through their healthcare provider. On our website, you can find information about how to get testing at home, mailed to you with no cost up front through your insurance. But for people who may not have a health provider, may not have insurance, that's really where we're particularly focused with our city testing sites, and we put them in the zip codes where they're most needed and we most want to push testing.
That's interesting. So you basically call your medical provider and they can mail you a testing kit for free?
Yeah, if you go to chicago.gov/coronavirus on the testing subsite, you'll see there that increasingly there are companies, one, for example, is LabCorp, that you click, and if you fill out a form, if you've got symptoms or you've got a known exposure, they will mail directly to your house without you needing to talk to your doctor, a test, and then you can mail it back directly from your house. So for people who have insurance, or even if they're not insured, if they provide information, the company will bill the federal government. And it's another important way to get tests into people's homes with low barriers. And I recommend people, if they've not looked at this, to really take advantage of it. It's newer that these tests at home are FDA approved, and we'd love people to also take advantage of those. It helps, again, keep some of our city sites for people who may have fewer options.
So lots of different options presented here to get testing. Still, you hear a lot of folks saying, we're having a hard time finding a test, or we go to some of these city sites and the lines are so long. What's your advice to them?
Right. So again, my advice is your first call, if you've got a doctor, is to your office. If you go to our website, there are about 125 places that are offering COVID testing in Chicago. Many of those are open to the public, particularly if people are insured. There's a lot of more options there. Also thinking about getting the testing at home, and we've been growing capacity, particularly in our federally qualified health centers, which are open to everybody, regardless of insurance, regardless of immigration status, and on a sliding scale, it goes all the way down to 0. We've pushed additional tests that we've gotten from the federal government into some of those high yield settings that are doing a lot of throughput. So we're looking to partners. We've really appreciated the way hospitals and clinical partners have been stepping up. The state is offering some additional testing this weekend. Lots of approaches here to continue to grow testing. When we have this much COVID going on, I know that there's more likely to potentially have some lines, but I'm encouraging people to do sign up ahead of time as they're able to for testing appointments, because that cuts down on the lines at the time.
All right, Dr. Allison Arwady, as I understand, you're going to be enjoying a Zoom Thanksgiving with some takeout. We wish you a happy Thanksgiving, and thanks for being here.
Happy Thanksgiving. Have a safe one.
You too. And now we check back in with Amanda Vinicky, who's live in Rogers Park as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Amanda.
Yes, and I'm joined by Cook County Commissioner Larry Sufferton. He's represented Rogers Park and surrounding areas since 2002. And you were just saying, actually, that when you first began this work, you had an office just down the road in Morse Avenue. Things looked a little different then. Tell us about Rogers Park, the character, and how it's changed.
Well, Rogers Park is, of the 78 communities in Chicago, is the one that's #1 on the list. And it has always been a diverse place. I went to college at Loyola University, so I've been involved in Rogers Park since actually high school, coming up here and doing things. The diversity continues to change. A lot of rental units, which means that every year there's a different group of people who come in and live here. When the students are here at Loyola, we have another mix, and so it's one of the communities that has the resources of the lake, one of the best beaches and lakefront part of Chicago, and it has wonderful schools, and it has people who are involved and care about each other. I know you talked to some of the folks today who have been involved in helping make sure we feed people.
And people here, everywhere, of course, dealing with the coronavirus. What can you tell us about the state of Cook County Health? The hospitals there, are they what? How close are they to reaching capacity? And of course, the strain on the health system as well, financially, already struggling pre-pandemic.
Well, yesterday we passed the county budget, and so we passed the budget for the hospital system. And our budget for the third year in a row had no tax increases, and we were able to stabilize our healthcare system. I mean, tonight there are about 70 patients with COVID over at Stroger Hospital. We still have capacity. We are working very hard to make sure our staffs are safe, that our patients are safe. We've had a little bit of an uptick at the jail, which is also under our hospital's control and treatment, but we're working on that. I think at this point we're stable, and I'm optimistic that we'll be able to deal with this next surge.
You mentioned, of course, the budget that passed unanimously, which is also a rarity, but from what I have gathered, it really is sort of relying on dipping into some reserves, and it's next year that Cook County's budget, you might not be able to say the same thing about no tax or fee increases. So what do you plan to do this year to go forward, looking at all of these times that the revenue losses are really going to take a hit for the county?
So we plan by increasing our reserves over the last 5 years. We also made additional payments on our pensions so that we have the best funded pensions in the immediate area. With those things going, we were able to do planning and strategize for where we are. Now, we've maximized our use of the federal dollars. We made some changes to our budget resolution yesterday that'll allow us to have more flexibility if the Biden administration gets us HEROES Act dollars or other things.
And a lot of governments waiting on that. I'm afraid that we will have to leave it at there. Thank you so very much to Commissioner Larry Sufferton. And Paris, back to you.
All right, be careful out there, man. And up next, we break down the newly approved pandemic budget for the city of Chicago, so stick around.
We can get past the idea of turning this into a political topic and really get to serving our communities. That's something I can get behind.
Maybe we can use this as a calling card to unite.
Though Mayor Lightfoot's $12.8 billion budget passed City Council, it didn't come without some opposition. Here's what the mayor had to say after aldermen voted 29-21 in favor of the plan.
This was a really difficult, hard budget. It stretched all of us in lots of different ways. What I appreciate is the number of City Council members who were willing to listen, who came to the table in good faith.
And WTDW News reporter Heather Sharon joined us now to take us behind the scenes at Virtual City Hall. Heather, very challenging budget. Remind us the finer points. What's in here?
Well, it had to close a $1.2 billion budget deficit, and it does that with a combination of tax hikes and debt refinancing. So The owner of a home worth $250,000 will see about $56 more in their tax bill, and you'll also pay more at the pump. The city's gas tax is going to go up from 3 cents to 8 cents, so that's probably about 36 cents per gallon. So it will definitely start to hit Chicagoans in the pocketbook as the city starts to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, even though the pandemic continues to rage and hurt Chicago businesses and its residents.
And 29 to 21 is a very slim margin compared to what we're used to with budgets. Was the outcome ever in doubt? Was there any last-minute wrangling?
There was a lot of last-minute wrangling. So originally the budget proposal included 350 layoffs. However, the mayor dropped that plan. Instead, the city will borrow $15 million to make up the difference. Also, the mayor added $10 million for violence prevention funds and agreed to test a mental health pilot program that will send non-law enforcement officers to some calls for help. A separate pilot program will test sending a combination of officers and mental health professionals. So the mayor had to do some wheeling and dealing. And even then, the tax levy only passed with 28 yes votes, and she needed 26. And in Chicago history, there's never been a closer budget vote.
No, we're used to running up the score, although as she said over and over, all I need is 26. She got that +2 and +3 with the budget. All right, Heather, thank you so much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website, where you'll find more details on the budget and how it impacts you. That's all at WTTW.com/news. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, how one food pantry is still serving Rogers Park 9 months into the pandemic. What distinguishes the work of advocacy journalists from biased journalism or misinformation? And exploring Monet and his connection to Chicago at the Art Institute and the Garfield Park Conservatory. But first, some more of today's top stories. Governor J.B. Pritzker asked the U.S. Federal Reserve to lend the state money to help mitigate the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the state's finances. In a virtual news conference this afternoon, Pritzker said that while the General Assembly had authorized him to borrow up to $5 billion, he believed it would be, quote, irresponsible to borrow that much, as the state would struggle to repay all that debt. He said today that it was the deadline today to tell the Fed how much Illinois wanted to borrow.
So in light of this pandemic's effects on our state's fiscal condition and my insistence that we look beyond this year to our state's longer-term fiscal condition, today we have notified the Federal Reserve of our intent to borrow only $2 billion, less than half of the $5 billion that's been offered to us by the federal government.
And Pritzker says the pandemic has cost the state more than $5 billion in tax revenues so far. On this eve of Thanksgiving, a treasure trove of documents have been released related to the investigation into House Speaker Michael Madigan's connection with ComEd. The documents show requests from Madigan associates for favors and jobs from senior ComEd officials. This includes emails between Michael McLean, a top Madigan ally, and former ComEd employee Fidel Marquez and Ann Pramaggiore, the utility's former CEO. In one of the many, many emails referencing, quote, Madigan letter, McLean writes to Marquez, CCing Pramaggiore, quote, we offered our friend 6 summer jobs. He has submitted 4. Attached is a request for a person to work in our legal department this year. He'll not learn very much, and he will not be able to contribute much, if anything. But that is still the ask. Another email references ComEd consulting work for Cook County Recorder of Deeds, Ed Mooney, and an additional email appears to show McLean seeking favors on behalf of House Republican leader Jim Durkin. Last week, McLean, Pramaggiore, and 2 others were indicted on charges of conspiring to make illegal payments to win the support of Madigan. Madigan has denied any wrongdoing. Residents haven't yet moved into Vista Tower, but it's getting a new name. Chicago's 3rd tallest skyscraper will now be called the St. Regis Chicago after the project developer signed a deal with St. Regis Hotels and Resorts, part of the Marriott International Hotel Group. They'll manage a 191-room hotel on the bottom 12 floors of that Jeannie Gang designed building. Since the pandemic hit, we've been talking with people from across the Chicago area's business community about how they've been coping with coronavirus. For some, the summer months offered a bit of a reprieve. Others still have not yet been able to reopen. So we wanted to check back in with some of the people we spoke with earlier this year, especially since loan funds are drying up and the cold winter months are beginning. And joining us are Joe Shanahan, owner of Metro, Smart Bar, and G-Man Tavern, and one of the founders of the Chicago Independent Venue League. Nabil Mobaya, general manager of the Kimpton Gray Hotel downtown and director of Midwest operations for the Kimpton Hotel brand. And Spring Capers, stylist and owner of Springs Place Salon in the South Loop. Welcome all of you back to Chicago tonight.
Thanks, guys.
All right, so Nabil, I'll start with you. When we spoke to you last summer, you were saying that occupancy was about 15 to 20% of your normal summer. Where is occupancy right now compared to where it normally is?
Well, unfortunately, I have to, say it's actually getting worse now. We're going into the winter months, and in Chicago, that's never a good thing because typically business will slow down. But additionally, we feel like we're in that second wave now where really things have slowed down. There's no more leisure travel, really no corporate travel. And as we know, conventions and sporting events, everything else has been canceled or shut down. So we're about 5% occupancy right now, between 5 and 10%, which is about an 80% decline from year over year. So it's a really rough spot that we're in right now.
It's very hard to drum up business. Joe Shanahan, we've talked to you a bunch. Rough spot that Metro has been in because you've been closed since March. You cannot reopen until there's a vaccine and everything reopens. How are you and your sister independent venues faring right now?
Well, we are phase 5 businesses. So what that means is, we will not be reopened until there is the state and city closures. With over 100 people furloughed for Metro, and one of the greatest staffs I've ever worked with, but from small venues like the Hideout all the way up to Metro, phase 5 businesses leave. And not to be abandoned by the federal government.
And we'll talk a little bit about some of that relief you hope to get. Spring, when we spoke with you in May, you were doing some virtual training sessions. Was there some pent-up demand when you were able to go back into business?
Yeah, a lot. I fortunately, when I came back, I was working 6 days, 12-hour days. It was a lot. Unfortunately, stylists, a couple of stylists had health concerns, so they couldn't come back. And people just got scared and did their own thing. So we were down. We were at 6, 7 stylists, and now we're at 2.5.
So you've lost some stylists. They're scared to come back. Are you worried about staying open right now, even at 25% capacity, and staying distant from your customers?
No, well, we had to do, because, we do volume business, so we had to scale back and do one client at a time and space out. So we had to just make a choice, It was like health over close contact. There's no way we can do our service without touching someone. So we had to be cautious.
Right. A lot of caution you have to take there. And Nabil, with a vaccine hopefully coming soon, does that signal light at the end of the tunnel? Have people proactively made bookings for the future, assuming things get back to normal in the spring or summer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we have seen more confidence in people trying to book around late spring, early summer, and into the second half of next year. So for us, that's sort of the light that we see is, we would say June onwards, especially with conventions, group business, even business travelers. And of course, in the summer, we're very, very anxious to have all of our leisure travelers back when we can have concerts and outdoor sporting events and festivals back on the calendar.
And Joe, I know you want to have concerts back on the calendar, hopefully by summer. You and these other venues you mentioned, Hideout, you formed the Chicago Independent Venue League to try and get relief. Have you had any success at the city, state, federal level in getting stimulus money or any other kind of relief?
Well, the dialogue is present, and I have to kind of shout out to Congressman Quigley, Congresswoman Senator Duckworth. my alderman Tom Tunney, we are in dialogue. That they understand our unsustainable predicament, and that is really the real bare facts of things. Is that we are the first to close and the last to. And so what we're trying to do is really create like as much inertia and energy behind the venues themselves, where if you don't buy a ticket, maybe it's time to buy a t-shirt or a poster. It really would help each individual member of Civil as well as Metro.
And Joe, how long can these venues, your venue and other venues, sustain this before we see some start to go out of business?
I wish I had a crystal ball to tell you that. I don't. I think that each and every venue is different. It's all predicament, but relationships with your bank and with your insurance and with just community itself really helps. Quite honestly, it's unsustainable, but looking at future. We do have things booked for spring and summer and fall, similar to what the hotel side is saying, is that it does look that once we will look at a vaccine, there will be movement to people coming back to participate in these activities.
I'm sure a lot of folks miss live music. I certainly miss live music. Spring, so you say you have to scale back your business. Do you hope for more relief from the federal government?
Relief is good because we have to buy PPE every day. Every that comes in has to have on a mask. We have to wear our masks. We have to wear goggles. So we have to have cleaning supplies. We have to buy partitions. Like that is an ongoing cost that we never had. So I did qualify for the PPP, and then I qualified for the business interruption. And so, but sustainable, cutting back how many clients I can do and buying PPE and keeping our business is challenging. It's challenging to be, we've foregone our profits, but we do want to sustain and pay and take care of ourselves.
So you're no profits right now, but you're getting by day to day. Nabil, what about employees? I mean, obviously you can't bring all the employees you want back to work if you're only doing 5% capacity. Could you lose them permanently to other industries?
Yeah, we've certainly seen that as a fallout from what's going on. There was a time when we wanted to bring a few employees back, and they've even talked to a whole bunch of employees who have already gone on to a different industry. They've just become scared of coming back to the hospitality industry because it just doesn't have a sustainable future at this time. And so that is something that I'm worried about as we rebuild our business. We're going to have to open up to new managers, new trainees, and seriously, it would feel like we're just reopening the hotel from scratch. And that's going to take a lot of time, training, cultural training, money, and that's also, like everyone else, not something that we have in abundance right now.
All right, we're gonna have to leave it there. Our thanks to Joe Shanahan, Nabil Mubayed, and Spring Capers. All the best to you all, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Garth. You too.
Thanks for having us.
And now we check back in with Amanda Vinicky, who's live in Rogers Park on the north side as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Amanda.
Paris, earlier today we stopped by a Just Harvest. That is a food pantry and community organization that has been feeding people here in Rogers Park for many years. We saw one woman today who outside standing in line waiting for food said she was so thankful, didn't know where else she would get a Thanksgiving meal. We spoke with the organization's executive director, Marilyn Pagan Banks, and I started by asking her about the origins of a Just Harvest.
We started off to make sure that people who needed food had access to food, right? But when we think about breaking bread, it's also meaning you gather, you welcome people to a table, you're willing to sit with them and eat with them. And when you break bread with people, you deepen relationships, you see people in a whole new way. And we're very committed to creating a space that's not just about food, but a space where people can deepen relationships, connect to each other, and begin to understand that we're sort of responsible for each other's well-being.
How do you do that in a pandemic where we are encouraged to not physically be together, to not break bread, particularly on a Thanksgiving holiday?
Well, as you can see from this space here, we used to do a sit-down restaurant-style meal. People come in, we bring the food to the table, serve them, ask them what they wanted to drink, and we had to shift things because of the pandemic. And since March, we've used this as a hub for groceries and deliveries and that kind of thing. And we're doing food to go. And while we can't gather folks in here, we have that same, spirit of hospitality. They get a full hot meal. It's a nutritious meal. We didn't skimp. We were very intentional about not doing a bag lunch because we know sometimes this is the only hot meal somebody's going to get. And so we did that. And then, of course, with our partners, we were able to provide, let me see, I want to make sure I got the right number, 343 households with turkeys and all the fixings for tomorrow's dinner. So
stuffing, cranberries,
all those things.
Cornbread, whatever.
Yes. And then, of course, we'll serve a Thanksgiving meal here as well.
And it's not just food that you are giving away. You have also helped to distribute other necessities.
Yes, we've done at least 3 or 4 mask giveaways, given out thousands of masks already. We give out masks every day. We have them ready at the front, especially if we notice that someone's mask is dirty or missing. Then we make sure that they get 2 masks with some instructions on how to take care of them and wear them properly. We do scarves and hats. We just did that in partnership with one of our congregations that made them. They crafty angels, they call themselves, and so we give they're brand new and for our patrons. We've also done hygiene kits. We're doing toiletries, we're doing diapers, and again, we're not going to be everything everybody always needs, but when we get donations or if we get a call and we have what somebody needs, we make sure we can get it to them.
What's next on the horizon? You're going into the holiday season where after Thanksgiving, of course, Hanukkah, Christmas, this time of greater desires, greater need, cold weather?
We're trying to really have conversations with, our elected officials here to figure out what can we do and how can we prepare ourselves, right? Because again, COVID, we can't let anybody come in. But at the same time, we know many of our neighbors, she's not out there now because of the weather, but typically one of our patrons, she sets up, she lays out there, waits for lunch, eats, and then leaves. And, she doesn't have anywhere to go. And so we try to be just as hospitable as we can outside, as long as everybody's safe. We're not pushing people away. We're not telling them to go stand someplace else. But we are asking ourselves, what can we do where we're both going to, provide a space, the bathroom or whatever, and make sure people are safe. It's not an easy fix, and so we don't know yet. We might have to figure out a structure to put outside so that people can be protected from the elements, but not come in. We're having those conversations now, and that's going to mean money. We talked to somebody about a scaffolding and the cost of that, right? And so we have to be creative, and we know we can get it done, as we did with the dining room, and with our partners, support. We feel confident that we're going to be able to do something, but our hearts are breaking wondering about those folks who have nowhere to go.
Dealing with elements such as these, rain beginning to fall again here in Rogers Park. Again, that was Marilyn Pagan Banks with a Just Harvest. They are hoping for donations to come ahead of Giving Thursday. And Paris, I will toss it back to you and to our viewers this evening with a message from the theater that's just within my eyesight. It's the main theater here on Morris Avenue. Sign, because the theater, of course, is closed, says, be healthy, be safe, be kind. Back to you.
You as well, Amanda, and happy Thanksgiving. And now we go to WTDW News Director and host of Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, Hugo Balta, with how advocacy journalists report on the ground from a conversation that aired last weekend.
Now, in a year filled with twists and turns from COVID-19 to the racial reckoning following the death of George Floyd and election 2020, news outlets are more important than ever in helping the public understand what is often chaos. Sometimes those news sources are criticized for leaning left or right, viewed as ideological propaganda machines. So what distinguishes the work of advocacy journalists, reporting that begins with non-objective viewpoints from biased journalism and misinformation? Joining us now with more are Carlos Ballesteros, reporter for Injustice Watch, Justin Agrelo, civic reporting resident at City Bureau, and Jackie Serrato, editor-in-chief of Southside Weekly. Let's get right to it. Jackie, how would you describe advocacy journalism? Some critics use advocacy journalism and fake news interchangeably. What's the difference?
Advocacy journalism is just another word for journalism. At Southside Weekly, for example, we've gotten rid of the notion of objectivity, which we understand as it being primarily white, male, and Western perspective, which there's nothing wrong with that point of view, but it's not a point of view that we place on a pedestal or that we model ourselves after. We are focused on the south side of Chicago, which is made up of Black and brown residents, immigrants, and other working class folks. And so we keep our readership in mind when we are writing these stories. We're not keeping shareholders or sponsors or other interests in mind. So advocacy journalism should really just be journalism.
Let's keep with that theme of point of view. Carlos, you describe Injustice Watch reporting as having a foundational understanding that some groups of people are systemically exploited. Where does the understanding come from, and how does it serve your reporting?
Yeah, I think it comes from fact. You know, I think it's silly to pretend that the world we live in and the country we live in is equally good to all people. I think it is a fact that Black people, immigrants, working class people, women, queer folk are all subjected to different inequities and systemic oppression, and to pretend otherwise is silly and inaccurate. And so I think us coming from that perspective, knowing that this is true, that these things are true, informs our reporting and informs what we should want to cover and how we want to cover it and what voices we want to include in those stories. Yeah, it's very foundational for us.
So now Jackie mentioned earlier she doesn't believe in objectivity. Justin, should a journalist's lived experience and personal identity inform their reporting?
Yeah, I think all of our lived experiences and our identities inform our reporting, if we want to admit to that or not. I think just thinking about source selection, whose voices are we centering? How are we describing communities? In what ways are we talking about communities? All of that really is impacted by who we are in our experiences. I think, like Jackie was saying, there is this idea that like a journalist is this empty vessel that is unbiased and that's just observing the world and reporting truth. But in actuality, a lot of our perceptions of the world are socially constructed, right? And yeah, I think, oh my God, I'm like losing my train of thought. But yeah, I think definitely like I think whether we want to admit it or not, our biases, we're people, we have opinions, and they impact the type of stories that we want to tell. But I don't necessarily think that means that we don't tell stories that are fair, that we don't tell stories that are accurate, and that we don't tell stories that are balanced.
Absolutely, all the stories that we do need to be based on facts, of course. Now, Jackie, let's talk a little bit more about advocacy journalism. Tell us about how you train journalists to practice advocacy journalism.
Well, for starters, we don't take police statements at face value. Or really any information that is coming from a figure of authority. We make sure that we always have the community perspective and the input of disenfranchised communities that make up part of our readership. So at Southside Weekly, even though we do offer paid opportunities, but for the most part, we're a volunteer newsroom, which means that we have an open door policy where anybody who wants to pursue a story can come to us and write that story with editorial support and any type of support they need to get their story out there. And that's because we value the point of view and the lived experiences of everyone in our beat, which is the South Side, right? And those lived experiences matter. I mean, one thing is to write about an issue, but to write about it and live through that issue, I think is extra powerful.
Jackie, I wanted to jump in there. One of the things that have been very important during the election have been voter guides. We here certainly at WTTW News produce a voter guide to help again the public have a better understanding of both not just the national races but the local races. Carlos, Injustice Watch Judicial Voting Guide has a point of view about what should keep a judge from retaining their position. What are the principles behind how that guide was developed?
Yeah, I will say, our guide was nonpartisan, which means we weren't telling folks who to vote for and who to vote against. But we did decide to highlight certain aspects of judges, their careers that were up for retention, and some of the controversies that have arisen from their careers. And we also made a point of highlighting which judges were prosecutors in the past, which judges were public defenders, and which judges practiced private law and for how long and for who. And, I think our interest was mostly to give the electorate all the information that we could so that people can make as an informed decision as they possibly could.
Great. Yeah, and I want to just get this one last question into Justin. Can you give us some examples of advocacy journalism bringing about positive change in communities?
I think Injustice Watch's Judge's Guide is a perfect example of that, of people being informed when they're getting in the ballot and deciding if a judge should be reelected or not. I can't think of the specific judge recently that broke where a judge was voted out of their seat, but I think it is a perfect example of giving the electorate what they need and informing them in a way that helps them navigate their lived experience in the world around them.
Justin, Jackie, Carlos, thank you so much for your time and for your insights.
Thank you so much.
Back with more Chicago Tonight right after this.
We're 2 days into the new decade and 2 days into recreational marijuana being legal in Illinois.
All our residents will be subject to a stay-at-home order.
That other pandemic that we're far too familiar with in America.
The best is yet to come.
It ain't over till every vote is counted.
This is far from over.
It's going to take years to really understand 2020. Chicago is home to more Claude Monet paintings than any city other than Paris. That's because the works of the famous French Impressionists made a strong impression on local collectors here beginning in the 1880s. Paintings from the Art Institute collection and from private collections have come together in a show called Monet and Chicago. And while the Art Institute is currently closed, arts producer Mark Vitale recently visited to see the show. Here's another look at that story.
Stepping into the world of Claude Monet, you see the play of light in his famous series of stacks of wheat, landscapes, and gardens. The paintings he made in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were radically different and very modern. They appealed to the well-heeled citizens of a young city that saw itself as modern.
Monet never came to Chicago, but his influence is everywhere in the museum, and I think even Chicago associates itself with the French Impressionists, and we wanted to celebrate that because we take it for granted that we have 33 Monets in our collection. Chicagoland collectors were very generous. We have works from private collections, so those are extremely exciting when you put them in dialogue with paintings that we've known about since the 1890s.
Scores of Monets were collected by the Palmer and Ryerson families. An 1888 review in the Chicago Tribune asked, "Why go to Paris since Paris has come to Chicago?"
When you're looking at a Monet, you're thinking of an artist who doesn't use the intermediary of drawing to get to where he's going. That was one of the innovations of the Impressionists, that they didn't spend the time of making careful drawings that then they would enlarge into a tableau, a painting. Everything looks like it was done in one go, and we know that he was all about observation, that he painted en plein air, outdoors, but after we've looked at them with infrared, with x-rays, with all of these wonderful scientific tools that we have at our fingertips now, we're finding out that, oh my gosh, this was an artist who struggled. This was an artist who changed his mind. This was an artist who came back in the studio, and that's where the magic happened. The first impression becomes something quite different.
Monet famously spent years painting his gardens at Giverny near Paris. This exhibit has a companion show in a garden at Garfield Park Conservatory, where a horticultural team found inspiration in the French painter.
I took elements from his paintings, the colors, the textures, specific flowers that were in his paintings and in his garden. He loved his nasturtiums, so we had to include those. And he always let them sprawl out into the pathways, just to break up the lines a little bit. Some things I found in his paintings, some things I found that were in his garden, such as Tithonia here, which is a Mexican sunflower. Dahlias, he loved his dahlias, so I had to include dahlias.
The Monet Garden at the conservatory is all outdoors and will last until the weather changes. Indoors at the Art Institute, the show, which had been scheduled to open in May, had to adapt to the new reality.
We really had to reconceive how it was going to be experienced. We have a certain way of doing things. I like benches. We don't have benches. I like very dramatic lighting in dark rooms, and of course you don't want that. You don't want people bumping into each other.
And they added extra space between paintings to encourage social distance.
I think that people who know our collection are going to be astounded and see the collection in a much different light. And also for Chicagoans, this is the exhibition about their city and about their museum.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
I saw the exhibit and I was astounded. It's great. And the show at the Garfield Park Conservatory has since closed. The exhibition at the Art Institute is called Monet in Chicago. While the museum is currently closed, the Monet exhibit was originally scheduled to run through January 18th. You can see more of those beautiful paintings on our website. And that is our show for this Wednesday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Just half of U.S. adults say they would get a COVID-19 vaccine. So what's the cause of the mistrust, and how can trust be rebuilt? And a growing movement to flip Black Friday to Black Shop Friday. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe. Happy Thanksgiving. Good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, representing dozens of families in the crash of a Boeing 737 MAX 8 jet. Mr. Clifford has been named lead counsel in litigation in federal court in Chicago.